Welcome to the Hey Boomer podcast, the live show that inspires boomers and beyond to recognize their own strengths and relevance through thought-provoking conversations with extraordinary guests. Today, we are talking to J.K. Coughlin about being a caregiver and getting through the emotional grind and taking care of yourself. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Hey Boomer. Hello, Hey Boomer listeners. So good to have everybody with us today, and I hope you are all having a wonderful day. Today, we are going to talk about being a caregiver, and we're going to talk with a caregiver about some of her experiences. Many of us in the boomer generation are currently caregivers or will become caregivers to an aging parent. We also may be still caring for children at home, and I've known plenty of people that are also caring for grandchildren at home. So it becomes kind of a squeeze between all of the people that are needing us. Personally, I'm very fortunate and blessed that my mother is still in good health, and my children are in good health and caring for themselves. So right now, I only have me to worry about, and my cat. But many seniors are really struggling with this and with what my guest today, Kay Coughlin, refers to as the emotional grind. I did a little research to find out how many people this actually impacts. And the National Alliance on Caregiving and AARP recently updated their report on caregiving in 2020, so this year. Their report stated that nearly 1 in 5 adults are providing unpaid care to an adult with health or functional needs. 1 in 5. 24% of Americans are caring for more than one person. 26% of Americans are caring for someone with some form of dementia. 21% of caregivers are reporting that their own health is being impacted and is not as good as they would like it to be. Not surprisingly, 61% of caregivers in America are women, and 61% of caregivers are still working another job. So there's a lot to talk about today. And before we get started, and hi, Elizabeth and Ann, good to see you. Before we get started, I wanted to talk to you about another area where boomers are struggling, and that is reimagining life after work. I talk to people who are feeling unfocused, like they've lost their sense of purpose, or maybe they're feeling like they don't really matter anymore. And I will help you feel energized again, engaged in life, purposeful, and meaningful. In my 8-week Turn Your Retirement Upside Down program, I will be your guide to capture those feelings again. It will take work on your part, and I know all of you are not afraid of a little work when it is something that is important to you. So if you're interested, please email me at wendy@heyboomer.biz, and we'll set up a 30-minute consultation and just discuss where you're at, see if it makes sense, and you will come away from just that conversation with some new insights. Nice. We're getting more people joining us, so I'm excited about that. I also wanted to say that we are building the most amazing community with Hey Boomer. And to me, a community means a place where you feel like you are part of something, you are meaningful to the whole environment around you. And without you, we would not have this Hey Boomer community. So please continue to be active and involved. We want your comments. We want your questions. We want your thoughts. And it is always a good time to add something into the comments, and then I will direct those back to Kay, and we will get you some answers. So with that, let me bring Miss Kay on. Hi, Kay.
Hey, Wendy. So good to see you. I'm so excited to be here.
Kay and I have become amazing friends because of Hey Boomer. We just met through LinkedIn, I think, and it's been a really wonderful friendship. So I'm grateful to have you, Kay. Kay is the CEO of Facilitator on Fire, and she has the dream to create a world that is generously inclusive of all adult generations. Facilitator on Fire offers two primary services: workshops and seminars to end age bias in the workplace, and caregiving coaching for individuals who are overwhelmed by the emotional grind of caring for a family member. Kay's passion for creating intergenerational harmony extends far beyond the office. She lives next door to her mother and is the manager of a Feed the Hungry garden. I love that. Yeah. The Feed the Hungry garden at her church, which was a project she founded to bring people of all ages together to grow food, community, and spirit. Kay honed her skills as a facilitator of intergenerational communication through producing large events and in the high-pressure world of nonprofit management and major gift fundraising. Mm-hmm. She was nationally recognized for her innovative work in the field of donor relations, which is the nonprofit equivalent of customer service. Kay also just released a new book and course called From One Caregiver to Another, Overcoming Your Emotional Grind. And we're going to have a special offer for you guys at the end of this show. So I can't wait to tell you about that. So welcome to Hey Boomer, Kay.
Wendy, this is just such a pleasure. You are a delight. Hey Boomer is, it's a movement. You're doing such a great job. I'm really proud of you, and I'm truly, truly honored to be a part of this. Thank you so much for letting me do this with you.
Well, thank you for doing it. I just want to share a couple of comments that are already coming in before we start with some of the questions that we have. Yeah. So Doris says that her brother took care of their mother until she went with the angels at 91 in 2017. Aww. And Kathy says, we are caregivers for over 5 years. We're caregivers for over 5 years. It was good and challenging at the same time. And we're going to talk about that.
Really good way of putting it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth says, my mother is in the late stage of dementia. My husband and I have cared for her for 10 years. We also cared for her husband for a year before he died.
Wow.
We have had weekday help, and Hospice of South Carolina offers quality of life care through Medicare. Both have saved our sanity, but it still takes a toll on us after hours and weekends.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. And to those of you out there who are caregivers, or maybe are part of a family where someone is a caregiver, or you support a caregiver, I just want to thank you for that work that you're doing. You know, I have the figures from that study in front of me too, Wendy, the AARP NAC study. And honestly, to think, the number, it's 21% of adults. That's 53 million people identify as caregivers, self-identify as caregivers. That's an astonishing number. And most of those are unpaid. Mm-hmm. And that's amazing. And I just want to say thank you to all of you out there doing that. I'm a caregiver too. I get it. And I feel you. I feel you right here. So thank you.
Thank you for that. So tell us how you became a caregiver. How did this journey start for you?
Well, for us, it happened over time. We were actually living a couple of hours away from here, and my parents had 5 acres. And when my kids were little, my husband and I were spending a lot of time coming down here to help with the property and the house. And my parents didn't need a lot, but they needed a lot of help with the heavy stuff. And that just got to be too much of a physical toll on my husband and I. One of us would come down for the weekend, or we would come down and we would bring the kids. And it was fun, but at the same time, it just got to be too much. So back in 2011, we decided to move down here, and we ended up buying my parents' house and building them what's called a granny flat, which is attached to the house. And they, again, at the time, they didn't need much help. So this was really just setting the stage for the future. But then my dad died very suddenly in, it was March of 2014. And that really marked a big change for us. Again, Mom didn't need that much more at the time in terms of anything physical. But of course, she needed a lot more support, emotional support, and she was lonely. And since then, she has slowed down a little bit, and she doesn't drive anymore. And of course, now we have COVID, so that's a whole different world. And for those of you out there struggling like we are with caregiving during COVID, I just want you to know that I'm struggling too. This is hard. This is really, really hard. And so for us, it's been, it's 2020, so 8 years now that we've really been living in this journey.
Yeah. So when your dad died suddenly, and I'm very sorry about that, you first had to deal with your own grief and your mom's grief. So that kind of started the journey, right? And then getting your mom going after that.
Well, we did. And actually, that was when I realized how much I had grown in those 2 years. And I say that because when we were sitting at the hospital, Dad had a stroke. They thought he was going to recover, and then he took a downturn. And it was a week and a half from the time he had his first stroke until he was gone. So we were sitting in the hospital after it became clear that he wasn't going to make any progress. And the doctors kept saying to us, we can do this intervention, we can do that intervention. Here in Ohio, we are very observant of a DNR, a do not resuscitate. And my father was very clear about his wishes, that he did not want to be put on any kind of life support, or I think he called radical interventions, and they kept offering them to us. And I have 3 siblings. So the 5 of us were sitting around in the hospital over a period of about 24 hours. And the doctors kept saying, we can do this, we can do that. And every time I just watched everybody collapse, because we had to keep saying no. We had to keep saying no, let our father die. That's a very difficult thing to say. And so eventually, and I remember this very clearly, and I actually wrote about it for something else that was published last year, I stood up and I had to say, stop. You are hurting us. You are harming us. We don't have a choice here. You don't have a choice here. And you have crossed a line. And I remember saying this to this line of physicians who probably don't hear that very often. And it was really at that moment, it was really, really hard, where I began to look back and see, I could see how much work I had already done toward becoming the caregiver I am now, how much work on that emotional grind. I couldn't have put words to it then. I've developed a language and a vocabulary now so that I can do it, and so I can help other people do it. But looking back, as hard as that was, being able to do that was the most loving action I could have taken, not just for myself, but for my entire family, including my mom.
Yeah, I love the way you put that was a loving action. And you're right, that's when you became the caregiver of the family, not just your mom. And that has posed some challenges for you, I think. There's, your extended family, your immediate family. So can you talk about some of the challenges that you've had since then to today?
Yeah. First of all, I want to give my immediate family, my siblings, and certainly my mother, a lot of credit for being willing to change along with me. Now, I have been the one to initiate it. I have been the one in every case to say, I don't like the way we did that, or I really feel like you're missing something here. Can we keep talking about this? Mainly in lots of different ways. I have just learned how to say to people, I don't agree and we need to keep talking. But that's not really what my family did before. And so I want to give my two brothers and my sister and my mom really all the credit I possibly can for not shutting me down, at least not often, when there have been times when I have said, hang on, I don't agree with you. I think probably the biggest challenge has been during COVID, honestly. I mean, that's, of course, what's most prominent in my mind right now, as I think it probably is for a lot of people. But my mom fell back in late May. It turned out to be nothing, but she did fall and she hit her shoulder and not her head. She was in the bathroom. And so even now we look back and we kind of laugh and say that she had an angel on her shoulder, because that, of course, is the number one place for people to fall and hit their heads. And so she spent a couple of days in the hospital. Now, since then, many of the hospitals have opened up so that caregivers or people who live with someone in the hospital can come in and visit them. But at the time, I could not go visit her. And it took about a day for me to really convince my siblings that that was okay. And I had to say to them, you know, at one point, the message I was hearing was, well, you should fight your way in. You should demand your way in. And I had to say, actually, I shouldn't, because when mom comes home, we can't get help. I have to rest now, because when she comes home, then she's going to be relying on me 100%. And I don't like it that she's alone in the hospital and she's lonely, because I was talking to her often. I said, but at least she's getting care there. And of course, that was the right move. And my siblings were very willing to see it once I said it, but I had to know to say that. And that has been the biggest catalyst here for all of us, is the fact that I am so willing to stick to my story, which is, I love mom, and I think this is the best way we're going to handle this. And you know, who can really argue with that? I know they love mom too, and I say that to them all the time. We love mom. Let's figure this out. Let's not get stuck in this place where you're feeling like I should do something that I don't agree to. Let's not get stuck there. Let's not live in that place. We don't need those kind of hard feelings.
So kudos to you that you've been able to work that out with your siblings, because that's not always easy. Yeah.
No, and it's still not easy. But, and I say that to my clients all the time, this is not easy, but it is possible. And that makes all the difference. I think no matter what your situation is just being able to see that even if things seem like they're one way and they seem like they have to be that way, that's probably not the truth. There's probably something else you could do or you could try, even if it's hard.
So, okay, let's talk about your journey. You talk about the emotional grind in your book, okay? And, you know, I'm sure that a lot of people know what you mean by that, but I'd like you to explain that a little bit, and how you went from being caught in that emotional grind to learning how to talk to your siblings, to learning how to take care of yourself. So what was that journey like?
Well, so the emotional grind, you know, I honestly think if you're feeling it, that you probably don't need to have it described to you. But at the same time, the way I define it is, it's a tension between what other people think you should and shouldn't do, and the things that you think are right instead. And the tension lives inside of each of us. We carry that around, and that becomes the grind because we wonder if other people have a different opinion. Am I truly wrong? Am I causing a problem? Am I a bad person? Am I a bad daughter? There's a lot of thoughts that end up going through our heads. And so the first step, and this is as far as I go in the book and in the audio course, is just observing that. That in itself is exceptionally difficult. Observing those specific things that you're thinking and things that you're doing so that you can see maybe what would I like to change? Not what do I have to change or what should I feel guilty because I haven't changed, but what am I doing right now? And which of those things would I maybe change if I possibly could? So it always starts with observing. And even though I've been doing this work as long as I have, I always go back to observing, and not just with my clients, but I mean with myself. I take a mental step back and say, what am I thinking? What is going on here? What am I doing? It always starts at that place of looking at yourself. And then the trick becomes to do that without judging yourself. So that's kind of tucked in there, that piece of observing. You can't change anything if you're going to blame and shame yourself. I am the queen of blame, shame, and guilt. I rule in that land. Anybody who's on here, I would tell you that I'm just the queen of that. But you can't change from a place of blame, shame, or guilt. You have to be able to get to a neutral place so that you can choose something else.
But I'm going to push you a little bit, Kay, because you did not always know this.
No, absolutely.
You had to hit a low point or feeling trapped in that emotional grind or those negative thoughts to get there. So if you're willing, I would like to hear a little bit about where you were trapped and how you kind of realized you needed to do something.
So the turning point for me really was when my dad died, because I had to step up my, I guess just at the time, with the amount of time I was spending with Mom. And after Dad died, we were all in an emotionally vulnerable state, for sure. And it was at that time that I really started to dig into myself. You know, often this is the point where you realize you need transformation. It's when something changes. It's an outside force. And in this case, it was my dad passing away so suddenly that I had to take a look at myself and really say, what's going on here? Why am I feeling, besides grief, why am I feeling stuck in this place of guilt and in this place of shame? Where is that coming from? And it was really rough. You know, I do mention in the book that I have depression. I was diagnosed with that years ago, and I've since realized that I have anxiety. So for me, sometimes it's fighting my way through that as well. And so, you know, being in grief and dealing with, at the time, at least some depression and definitely some anxiety, I also tended to look at myself and say, well, of course, this is my fault. I'm doing something. And that wasn't working for me at all. And it was at that point when I really felt so stuck in that place. It was like I was on a hamster wheel. Like I couldn't get out of it. I was going through the same emotional cycle over and over and over. And I said, what's going on here? And that was when I began to really reach out to get some help. I found my way into some self-help books and movements to begin this exploration of my own mind. I had no idea where it would lead, but I just had to do something to get out of that. And at the same time, of course, while supporting my mom, while starting my business full time, while being in a marriage, all of this was going on at once. It was relentless. I wasn't getting relief from anything. And so I had to create that relief from myself. But I'll tell you what, I was stumbling around in the dark. There was no path out there for me. I had to look at other people and other knowledge about things that were similar in ways and start to learn to apply it to myself as a caregiver. And that was also when I began to really see that a lot of help out there that is meant for caregivers is really just telling us how to care for the people we care for. It's not about how to truly care for yourself. Someone tells you need to get more sleep. Thanks. Okay, I couldn't have figured that out on my own. That's not relief.
Right.
Relief is figuring out, why am I not getting sleep and how can I truly help myself? And it's being able to observe what I'm doing and manage my own thoughts.
So, and I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability with that answer, because I think that helps. And that's one of the things I love about you. You're just so relatable. We've had a couple of questions here.
Okay.
So how did you take care of your own health during all of those years and continuing to take care of your own health?
Well, to be honest, now I draw a direct line between my mental care for myself, and this is this work that I do every day to manage my thoughts, and my physical health. Because when I am managing my own thoughts, I am able to take care of myself physically. Back at the beginning of all this, I will say that I've always had good lifelong habits of eating and exercise. I'm not saying that I was doing that all the time, but I didn't have to build those habits at the beginning. There were long periods of time when I wouldn't exercise and when I wouldn't eat well. And it always threw me out of balance, but I had that to go back to because I had always been doing that. So I did have that. I did have that to rely on. But now that I do this work of managing my thoughts and the way I think and act in my caregiving situation, in my business and with my family every day, it is far easier to take care of myself. I will tell you, I still have sleepless nights. I still have anxious nights. There are still stretches of 2 weeks at a time where I will not get a decent night's sleep. And some of that could be my age, who knows what that is. So, I don't want to make it seem like I've got this all fixed and I'm perfect and nothing's ever going to be wrong again. No, this is ongoing work, but doing the work on my mind just makes the rest of it in a point where it can fall into place.
So I think what you're talking about, doing the work in your mind in a lot of ways. So as caregivers, a lot of people are told, well, you need to sleep more, or you need to exercise more, or you need to get time out of the house, or you ask somebody else to help you or whatever. And if you're not doing that the right way or whatever you think is the right way, then you start in with the guilt and the I'm no good, I'm bad.
Yeah.
So I think these thoughts that you're talking about, observing, writing it down, I'm upset about these feelings, can really free you up from some of that guilt.
Yeah. And this is a tool that I use with myself all the time. I recommend it to all of my clients. When people start working with me, I actually send them a journal to put their thought downloads in, because this process of capturing your thoughts, which is, it's a little bit like journaling. It's got a more specific purpose, but if you already journal, this will feel familiar to you. That process of being able to see it, being able to see what's in your head, that's really where the relief starts. Because when you take a thought out of your head and put it down on paper, you don't have to carry it anymore. That's part of that grind, is having all of these thoughts mashed up in our heads, not being able to sort them out, feeling who knows what about them. And it's the weight. And it's like you have a really, really heavy hat on. Just drags you down. And that practice of taking those words out of your head and getting them onto paper, it's like taking a deep breath. Now, the other half of that is not judging yourself for what you put down on the paper. That's not easy. That's very difficult. It's crucial to do, but the first part is to just get it onto paper. And I do talk about that in the book, and I offer a guide on how to do a thought download, and I have a blank journal page that you can download to help you do that.
Yeah, and I was telling Kay before we came on the air that, reading through her book, this idea of the thought download works in so many different situations. If you don't edit your thoughts, right? If you're upset because you're feeling isolated, or you're angry because somebody said something or whatever, just get it down. You can go back and look at it later, but don't edit it while you're feeling the feeling. Let the feeling be what it is.
So one of the things I've learned about feelings is that they are so much harder on you when you push them away. When you are angry at someone and you try not to be, it pushes back on you. So when you're angry at someone, really the only way to figure out what you're going to do instead is to go through it. Mm-hmm. Now, that's step 2 in the process. We aren't taught that we should feel all of our feelings. We are taught to resist them and push them away and deny them, but that only gives them more power. You start with observing, and then you make some decisions. Oh, I clearly have some anger I haven't been feeling. What am I going to do about that? Am I going to keep denying that, or am I going to let myself feel it? It's so hard to feel the feelings, but the relief increases exponentially when you let yourself be who you really are. I'm not saying that you have to tell someone that you're angry about them. That's not the same thing as feeling it. But letting yourself go through a feeling, and I'm talking about grief, anger, sadness, frustration, despair, fury. I mean, there's a whole range of these. The feelings don't hurt you. It's pushing them away. That's what hurts you.
Yeah. And I think the next step that you help people learn about, besides not judging it, is that our thoughts are what create those feelings. And so Now what do we do with changing those thoughts? You talked about some of the challenges you had with your siblings. We have Anne here is saying that her issue is not convincing her siblings because they're hands off. They care, but they're not available to help. So that leaves everything up to her. And she feels like very isolated, like she's on an island by herself all the time. And that's a kind of a different challenge. What would you say to her?
So we're all going to have our own challenges. I mean, across life, but we're talking about caregiving today. I understand the isolation. I have felt that, particularly during COVID, when I feel like, and here's the kicker, I can't get help, or I shouldn't get help. That second piece, that I shouldn't get help, that was me putting all kinds of rules on myself. As we began to learn, I'm just using COVID as an example, but as we began to learn more, we really did begin to understand the threshold of safety, that if you're wearing masks and you limit contact, it's really okay to get some help. And so my sister does live here in town, and I called her and I said, can you stop by once a week and maybe take mom for a drive? It's not that I can't do that, but she gets so much out of interacting with somebody besides me and my kids. And my sister said, of course, I would be happy to. And the only thing that was holding me back from doing that was me asking. And there are all kinds of other services around us that I could also be asking for if I thought mom needed them. And we will be exploring some of those in the coming months. Now that it's getting colder, I'm going to have to be careful about taking mom outside of the house myself. There's all kinds of things we have to worry about. But the thing that has changed for me and has made me feel less isolated is I have given myself permission to ask for help, even knowing that sometimes people are going to judge me for that. I'm willing to take that on. I'm okay with that. I don't know if that's not on, but
yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because I think that's something that we find difficult to do, to ask for help. You know, most of us have this idea that that's weak to ask for help. And I have learned that most of the time people are happy to help if they only know how, you know. So by asking them, you are offering them an opportunity to be helpful too.
That is for sure true. And I also want to say that if you're watching this live, or maybe you're watching it recorded later, and you're thinking to yourself, I just don't feel like I could ask for help. That doesn't feel right to me. It's not something I should do. I would say that's your starting point. I'm not going to judge you for that. I would please invite you, don't judge yourself for that. We've identified a starting point for you, and that's where you begin. And everybody's got a different starting point. And sometimes those change from day to day. And sometimes you think you've got something totally licked, and a few months later it'll hit you again, and you find yourself needing to do the work all over again. And that's okay. That's just how we are as humans. And the more I do this for myself, but also with my clients, the more I just see that as really a beautiful part of being human. And it's our chance to learn to love ourselves unconditionally. So hard to do, but so worth it. And to grow, really, as humans.
Yeah, it is so hard to do. So I want to talk to you about your dreams, because in the introduction we talked about you have these dreams. Mm-hmm. And part of that is that you are, doing your business, raising these two amazing children that you have. You and your husband, I'm sure, have other dreams for yourselves. How do you keep those dreams alive with everything else that you have going on?
Well, I think the first thing is that I know what they are. So if you're watching this and you don't know what your dreams are, or you maybe feel like you're not supposed to have dreams because you're a caregiver, you're wrong. As a caregiver, there really are no shoulds or shouldn'ts. It's all up to you. So I really have identified what my dreams are. That has changed over the course of my life, as it does for everyone, but I know what they are. And I'll tell you, I think the two ingredients really are patience and persistence. And the patience comes from the fact that when something happens and we have a setback, like mom falling or COVID, that's going to change my timeline. And I have to be willing to say, okay, the timeline has changed. The book that I released in October, I had initially wanted to get out at the end of July. And it just couldn't happen because of circumstances like mom falling and COVID and a number of other things. And so I had to be willing to just say, this doesn't mean it's over. This means that I have to move the timeline. And then the other thing is persistence. Now, I was born with a persistent streak. I admit that. But it is something that anybody can learn. And so I say to myself on a regular basis, all right, so I'm going to write this down and I'm going to come back to it. I'm not going to give up on it. I'm going to keep going. You know, part of this is failing. Part of this is when I'm going through a depression. All of this is I'm not willing to give up. I'm persisting. So I think patience and persistence, again, those are not easy things, but when you have things that you want to accomplish, no matter what your circumstances are in life, and especially when you're a caregiver, I think patience and persistence, to me, that really probably defines my love for myself, is I'm willing to give myself that kind of grace and that kind of peace and say, okay, this has changed a little bit, but that doesn't mean it's gone. That doesn't mean it's over.
I think it's also, I mean, you have such a tremendous, or you have learned to have this tremendous belief in what's possible. You know, I love the saying when so the word impossible, if you break it up, really means I'm possible. Mm-hmm. And I know for me, it took a long time to learn that, because when I was, you know, being a single mom and living on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and mac and cheese, you know, I didn't believe everything was possible. I just saw very limited life opportunities. You know, I had to make food, get food on the table. And I would imagine that's an easy place to get caught when you're a caregiver, because there's so many demands on you.
Well, so, and because that's what we're taught. We really are taught that we have limitations, and that based on your gender or the color of your skin or your economic circumstances or your education, that there are things that you can't do. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer. Certainly women had a lot more rights as I was coming up than many women who are older than me. But there were still many things that I was not encouraged to do, that I was, and I'm short. You can't see me, but I'm 5'2". And so I'm this little tiny person. And, you know, throughout my life, people have both metaphorically and physically patted me on my head and sent me on my way. And you swallow that stuff, and then it becomes part of your reality. And it takes someone coming along, or in my case, a bunch of people over a lot of years coming along and saying, that's all a lie. That's all a lie. The truth is that you can achieve whatever you can imagine. And even if you don't, how amazing will your life be while you're trying to do it? Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's about the journey. It's not about the destination. I know that's a cliche, and I'm sorry, but it's really true. You know, even if my business never grows to the place where I have this dream for it, you know, look at what I'm able to do in the world right now, just as it is. And if I had not been willing to push through all of that garbage about you have limitations, you can't do this, whatever, then I wouldn't be here now. And it's scary. It's really scary. And there are days when it's hard to get out of bed. But I don't have to have limitations unless I believe in them. And that's the trick. I just don't believe in those limitations.
So there are two comments that have come in that I think I need to share before we wrap up. And it's about resentment. And it's about feeling like your siblings are not there to help, not offering to help, and feeling this resentment to them because of all the responsibility falling on you.
I get it. Yeah, I get it.
And so that's where that's where you start, right? That would be one of your comments of that's where you start.
That's where you start. You have these feelings of resentment. Where is that coming from? Oh, and by the way, it may be that they aren't helping. I mean, that literally may be the truth. Now, what do we do with that? What do we want to make all of this mean? What do you want instead for yourself? You can't change your siblings. You might be able to get some help over time. We can't promise that. That may or may not happen. But you can look at yourself and say, but what do I want instead? Who do I want to be instead? And by the way, I am not telling anybody to be little Mary Jane Sunshine or Mary Poppins about this.
No, you're
There are
not.
days when I'm the grouchiest person on the face of the earth. But that won't stop you from changing your thinking about what's possible and what's not. And I think the fact that whoever it is that identified resentment, that's a big step to be able to name it and observe yourself in it and realize, I don't like the way this feels. And there's your starting point.
Right.
Where do we go from there? That's the real question.
Yeah, that's great. So I always like to ask my guests what are one or two things that you think would be most significant to leave with the Hey Boomer audience today?
Well, I think the biggest one is probably that you actually don't have any limitations as a boomer or as a caregiver, no matter what people say to you. That can be a hard one to really get into your head, but it's really worth it. And you have to start by learning what you believe your limitations are.
Mm-hmm.
What are the thoughts in your head? What are the things you're doing every day that are keeping you from being something else or becoming someone else? And just realize, this is a lifelong process. It comes and it goes, it ebbs and it flows. As I say, you'll do the work, you have to go back and do the work again. And that's okay, and that's human, and it's amazing.
Yeah, that's so important. Thank you, Kay. I wanted to let everybody know if they want to reach out to you for any further questions or clarifications about what you've talked about, they can find you on facilitatoronfire.net.
That's right.
That's where your contact information will be. And because you have so graciously offered us this gift, Kay has offered to share online access to her book and her audio program to the first 5 people, just 5, who send me an email. And I'll tell you where you send it. You send it to wendy@heyboomer.biz and tell us what it would mean to you to get access to this book and this audio course. And then we will give you that access. So I am so grateful to you, Kay, for being with us today. And
thank you for the work you're doing, Wendy. This is really extraordinary. You're a fantastic host. Thank you so much.
You're sweet. Thank you. I want to tell you about my guest next week. Totally divergent from what we talked about today. His name is Darrell Hood. And Darrell is 62 years old. He's an adventurer and an adrenaline junkie. Darrell, when he retired, took a bicycle trip across the country.
Of course, as one does. That's amazing.
Yeah. And he also just recently rode the Blue Ridge Parkway from Virginia all the way back down here. And so, as you can imagine, he has had some quite interesting experiences along the way, and he has met some amazing people, and he's going to share some of those stories with us. So that should be a fun show to learn about some of his stories. He loves telling them, so it'll all be good. Just one more note. If you are interested in turning your retirement upside down, please drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz. And I always like to wrap up by saying a quote from C.S. Lewis. And he said, "You are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream." So let's keep getting together every week to dream together, to share, to build this community. I am so grateful for all of you. Thank you so much. And my name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.